Did you know that in the Middle Ages, some marriage contracts included a clause for the wife's morning gift? This was a payment from the husband to the wife on the morning after the wedding, a token of her value and a form of financial security. It wasn't about love. It was about property. Marriage was a deal, a social contract, an economic alliance. Her happiness was a bonus, not the goal. Most people didn't even choose their own spouse. So why would we look to a time of high infant mortality, rampant disease, and rigid social hierarchy for advice on modern relationships? Can an era that viewed marriage as a tool for consolidating land and power teach us anything about love, partnership, and lasting happiness? The answer is yes, but not in the way you might think. We have to dig, we have to look past the grim surface to find the timeless human truths buried beneath. Because the problems of jealousy, boredom, mismatched expectations, and the simple difficulty of living with another human being are not new. They are ancient. And sometimes the oldest wisdom, stripped of its original, harsh context, is the most profound. What if the medieval focus on duty over feelings holds a key to surviving the low points in our own marriages? What if their understanding of public and private life could help us navigate the pressures of social media? What if their brutal honesty about the economic side of partnership could save us from financial ruin? Let's explore the forgotten wisdom of a world very different from our own. Number 25, must you forgive everything? The medieval world had a complicated relationship with forgiveness. On one hand, Christianity, the bedrock of society, preached forgiveness as a divine command. The Lord's Prayer, recited daily, contains the line, "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." The concept of confession and penance was central to medieval life. You sinned, you confessed to a priest, you performed your penance, and you were absolved by God. This created a framework where forgiveness was transactional and ritualized. But on the other hand, medieval society was built on honor, oaths, and retribution. Feuds between families could last for generations, sparked by a single insult or injury. A slight against a lord's honor demanded a response, often a violent one. This was a world of public shaming, of stocks and pillories where transgressions were put on display. So, how did this apply to marriage? A husband's authority was near absolute. A wife's infidelity was seen as a property crime against him, a stain on his honor that could bring ruin to his name. Forgiveness for such a public and grievous offense was rare and difficult, yet for the smaller daily sins of life together, a harsh word, a forgotten chore, a moment of selfishness, forgiveness was built into the rhythm of religious life. The idea was not to forget, but to absolve through a process. The sin was real and it required an action to be cleansed. This gives us a very different model from our modern one. Today, we are often told to forgive and forget. We see forgiveness as a purely internal emotional process. It's about letting go of anger for our own mental health. The medievals would find this strange. For them, forgiveness was often a public or semi-public act that restored social order. It acknowledged the wrong but allowed the relationship to continue within the community's rules. The modern psychologist Dr. Janice Abrams Spring talks about this in her book, How Can I Forgive You? She distinguishes between cheap grace, which is a quick and hollow forgiveness that papers over the problem, and earned forgiveness, which requires the offender to truly understand the pain they cause, take responsibility, and work to rebuild trust. This is a surprisingly medieval concept. It's not just about the victim letting go, it's about the perpetrator earning their way back. The medieval practice of penance, while it could be harsh, was a clear roadmap for the person who did wrong. It was their work to do. They couldn't just say sorry and expect everything to be fine. They had to demonstrate their remorse through action. Applying this today is powerful. When your partner hurts you, the pressure shouldn't be solely on you to get over it. The medieval wisdom, filtered through a modern lens, suggests that true forgiveness is a two-person job. The person who caused the harm has a responsibility to actively earn back the trust they broke. This might mean more than just apologizing. It might mean changing a behavior, making a tangible gesture of restitution, or patiently working for weeks or months to show they are trustworthy again. This approach honors the pain of the person who was hurt. It validates their feelings by acknowledging that the offense was real and has consequences. It prevents the victim from feeling like they are weak or a doormat for forgiving. They are not just letting it go, they are accepting a period of repair initiated by their partner. It turns forgiveness from a passive act of erasure into an active process of rebuilding. But this raises some difficult questions. If forgiveness must be earned, what happens when the person who hurt you is unwilling or unable to do the work? At what point does holding out for earned forgiveness become a prison of your own making? And in a world without a shared religious framework like confession and penance, how do two people even agree on what making amends truly looks like? Is some pain so deep that no amount of work can ever truly repair the breach? Number 24, are you and your spouse a team? In the Middle Ages, marriage wasn't a union of two individuals seeking personal fulfillment. It was the creation of a single economic and social unit. The family was a business. For peasants, the business was survival, working the land, raising livestock and producing enough to eat and pay the lord's taxes. A husband and wife were a team of laborers. He plowed, she sowed, he scythed, she raked. Their work was distinct but completely interdependent. If one failed, the entire enterprise starved. For artisans in a town, the family was the workshop. A blacksmith's wife wouldn't just keep the house, she might manage the accounts, order supplies, and deal with customers. The home and the workplace were the same physical space. For the nobility, the business was the management of an estate, a holding. The lord might be away at war or court, and his lady would be in charge of the castle, managing the servants, overseeing the harvest, and even organizing its defense. The Past and Letters, a famous collection of correspondence from a 15th century English family, show Margaret Paston managing family lands and legal disputes with incredible competence while her husband was away. She was not his romantic partner in our sense. She was his deputy, his business manager, his most trusted ally. This idea of marriage as a functional partnership has been somewhat lost in our modern emphasis on romance and emotional connection. We look for a soulmate, a lover, a best friend. The medievals looked for a capable partner. They understood that the practical, day-to-day running of a life required a reliable teammate. The passion might fade, the friendship might waver, but the shared work of life, paying the bills, raising the children, maintaining a home, never ends. When we view marriage as a team, it reframes our entire approach to conflict and chores. It's no longer my work versus your work. It's our work. A sink full of dirty dishes isn't a personal affront or a sign that your partner doesn't care about you. It's a logistical problem that the team needs to solve. A financial setback isn't a reason to blame each other. It's a challenge that the team must face together. Modern relationship research supports this. The Gottman Institute, which has studied thousands of couples, talks about the importance of building love maps and turning towards your partner. A core part of this is being deeply involved in the practical details of each other's lives. It's knowing their daily stresses, their work challenges, their logistical concerns. This is the modern language for what medieval couples did out of necessity. They were intimately aware of each other's roles and burdens because the survival of their business depended on it. Dr. John Gottman also emphasizes the concept of a we-ness that successful couples develop. They see themselves as a unit facing the world together. This is the very essence of the medieval household as business model. They were quite literally a corporation of two. So while we may not be running a feudal estate, thinking of your marriage as a family Inc. But what happens when the teammates have fundamentally different ideas about how the business should be run? If one partner is a risk taker and the other is cautious, can the team truly function? And in our modern world where individuals change careers and identities multiple times, what happens to the partnership when one person's role on the team changes so drastically that the original business model no longer makes sense? Is the team itself more important than the happiness of the individuals on it? Number 23. Should you suffer in silence? The medieval world was loud, not with machines, but with people. Privacy was a luxury few could afford. Most families lived in 1 or 2 rooms. People ate, slept, and argued in close quarters. And communities were tight-knit and intrusive. Your business was everyone's business. If a husband and wife were fighting, the whole village knew. They could hear it through the thin wattle and daub walls. If a husband was seen to be beaten or dominated by his wife, he might be subjected to a charivari or skimmington ride, a humiliating public parade where the community would mock him with loud noises and effigies. This was a form of social pressure, a way for the community to enforce its norms about proper marital behavior. On the other hand, if a husband was excessively cruel, the wife's family or the church might intervene. There was no expectation that marital problems should be kept secret. They were a community concern because the family unit was the basis of the community itself. A dysfunctional family was a threat to social order. This is a stark contrast to our modern ideal of the private, self-contained couple. We are taught that you don't air your dirty laundry in public. Marital problems are seen as a private failure to be handled behind closed doors, perhaps with a therapist. We post our happy vacation photos on social media, but hide the silent, tense car ride that preceded them. We believe that a strong marriage is one that presents a united, perfect front to the world. The medievals would have found this bizarre and even dangerous. They believed in the power of social pressure to keep people in line. They understood that couples, left entirely to their own devices, could get lost in their own toxic patterns. As the community, for all its intrusiveness, acted as a container. It provided a set of external expectations and, in some cases, a safety net. The modern takeaway isn't that we should go back to public shaming rituals, but it is a powerful reminder that isolating ourselves as a couple can be unhealthy. The pressure to appear perfect is immense. It can prevent us from seeking help when we need it. The medieval model suggests there is wisdom in having a trusted community, close friends, family friends, who know what's really going on. This isn't about complaining about your spouse to anyone who will listen. It's about having a small circle of people who can provide perspective, support, and accountability. It's about letting people in. Sociologists have long documented the decline of community ties in the Western world. Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, famously tracked the erosion of social capital in America. We are more connected digitally, but often more isolated in our real lives. This isolation can put an impossible strain on a marriage, forcing two people to be everything to each other. The medievals knew this was a terrible idea. They had godparents for their children, guilds for their work, and the parish for their spiritual life. The marriage was central, but it wasn't the everything. It was embedded in a web of other relationships that could support it in times of crisis. So the next time you and your partner are struggling, consider the medieval alternative to suffering in silence. Consider confiding in a trusted friend. Consider letting another couple whom you respect know that you're having a hard time. It is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of strength. It is an acknowledgement that your partnership is too important to be left to struggle alone in the dark. But where is the line between healthy community support and destructive gossip? In an age of social media, how can we share our struggles authentically without performing them for an audience? And if your community's values conflict with your own, can their intervention ever be truly helpful, or will it always be an act of coercion? Is total privacy in a marriage a modern achievement to be cherished, or a dangerous trap of our own making? Number 22, must one person lead? The medieval model of marriage was unequivocally hierarchical. The husband was the head of the household, the lord of his small domain. This was reinforced by law, custom, and most powerfully by the church. Drawing on the teachings of St. Paul, theologians like Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century articulated a clear chain of command: God, Christ, man, woman. The man's authority over his wife was seen as a reflection of Christ's authority over the church. It was not meant to be tyrannical. It was supposed to be a benevolent, protective leadership, but it was absolute. A wife's duty was to obey. This was not just a social convention, it was a divine ordinance. The popular medieval text, The Goodman of Paris, written in the 1390s by an elderly husband for his young wife, is a detailed instruction manual on how to be an obedient and efficient spouse, comparing a wife's devotion to her husband to that of a loyal dog to its master. For us, this is shocking and offensive. The very idea is antithetical to our modern belief in marriage as a partnership of equals. But if we can strip away the rigid, patriarchal shell, is there a kernel of wisdom inside? The medievals understood that any organization, whether it's an army, a kingdom, or a household, needs clear lines of authority to function, especially in a crisis. Like when a decision had to be made quickly, the barn is on fire, the Lord's Reeve is at the door demanding taxes, and there was no time for a lengthy collaborative discussion. A leader had to decide, and the others had to act. They prized order and stability above all else, and a clear hierarchy was the most efficient way to achieve it. In our modern marriages, we strive for a 50-50 partnership. We believe every decision should be made by consensus. And in an ideal world, it would be. But life is not always ideal. What happens when two equal partners fundamentally disagree on a major life decision? Where to live, which school for the children, how to handle a financial crisis. A commitment to pure equality can lead to decision-making paralysis. Couples can remain stuck for years, unable to move forward because neither person will yield. The hidden wisdom here is not that the man should always be in charge. It is that in different areas of life, it can be healthy and efficient for one person to take the lead. This isn't about permanent gender-based hierarchy, it's about flexible, domain-specific leadership. Perhaps one partner, who is more financially savvy, takes the lead on investments and budgeting. The other partner, who has better instincts about family dynamics, might take the lead on decisions related to the children's upbringing or dealing with in-laws. This is what management experts call distributed leadership. The authority isn't concentrated in one person, but is shared out based on skills and expertise. It requires a great deal of trust and mutual respect. The person not leading in a particular area has to trust the other's judgment and be willing to follow their lead. The person who is leading has to do so with the team's best interests at heart, not just their own. This model replaces the rigid medieval hierarchy with a more dynamic and responsive system. It acknowledges that it is not always possible, or even desirable, for two people to have exactly equal say on every single issue. But can humans ever truly handle shifting power dynamics without resentment? Does allowing one partner to lead in one area inevitably cede too much power to them in the relationship as a whole? And what happens when both partners believe they are the expert in the same domain? Is the paralysis of a 50-50 disagreement better than the potential tyranny of a designated leader making the wrong choice? Number 21. Should your vows be unbreakable? To the medieval mind, a vow was a sacred and binding oath, made not just to another person but to God. A marriage vow was the most serious of these. The sacrament of marriage, officially defined by the Church at the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, was considered indissoluble. Once you were married in the eyes of God, you were married until death. There was no divorce as we know it. The only way out was an annulment, which was a declaration that the marriage had never been valid in the first place. Grounds for an annulment were very specific and hard to prove. For example, if the couple was too closely related consanguinity, if one party had not freely consented, or if the marriage had not been consummated. For the vast majority of people, marriage was a life sentence, for better or for worse. This permanence, which seems so restrictive to us, provided a powerful sense of stability and security in a very insecure world. Life was short and brutal. Famine, plague, and war were constant threats. The one thing you could count on was your family structure. The unbreakability of marriage vows was the glue that held the social fabric together. We live in a different world. We expect to live for 80 or 90 years. We change jobs, cities, and even identities over the course of our lives. The idea of making a permanent, unbreakable promise to another person at the age of 25 can seem terrifying, even irrational. We value flexibility, freedom, and personal growth. Divorce is common and socially acceptable. It is seen as a necessary escape route from a relationship that no longer brings us happiness or fulfillment. And yet, many people still feel the pull of that old idea of permanence. The wedding ceremony, with its vows of "till death do us part," remains a powerful cultural ritual. There is a deep human longing for a bond that is truly secure, a partner who will be there no matter what. The medieval wisdom is not that you should stay in a miserable or abusive relationship. Or even the medieval church had some mechanisms like legal separation for impossible situations. The wisdom is in the mindset that the vow itself creates. When you remove the easy exit, you are forced to approach problems differently. If you know that breaking up is not an option on the table, you have to find a way to solve the problem. It forces a level of commitment and creativity that is often absent when the back door is always open. The modern sociologist Brené Brown writes extensively about vulnerability and commitment. Committing to another person, truly committing, is the ultimate act of vulnerability. The medievals understood this in their bones. By making the vow unbreakable, they were creating a container strong enough to hold all the messiness of a shared life. It wasn't about trapping people. It was about creating the psychological and social safety to be fully committed. When you and your partner hit a rough patch, what would change if you both operated from the assumption that you will get through this together? Because there is no other option. It shifts the question from should I stay or should I go to how do we fix this? But does this unbreakable mindset create a dangerous power imbalance, allowing one partner to behave badly with no fear of consequence? In a world where personal happiness is a primary goal, is it morally right to subordinate that happiness to the abstract principle of a vow made decades earlier? And if people change so fundamentally over a lifetime, is the person you are at 60 truly bound by a promise made by the very different person you were at 25? Is permanence a beautiful ideal or a cruel cage? Number 20, how important is your family name? In the Middle Ages, you weren't just an individual. You were a Montague or a Capulet. You were a Percy or a Neville. Your family name meant everything. It defined your social standing, your wealth, your loyalties, and your future. A marriage was not the union of two people. It was an alliance between two families. The primary goal was often to preserve or enhance the family's lineage, property, and power. When a nobleman married his son to the daughter of another lord, he was acquiring land, forging a military alliance, and ensuring the continuation of his name into the next generation. The individual happiness of the couple was a secondary, if not irrelevant, consideration. The family name was a legacy, a living entity that stretched back through generations, and with the right marriage would stretch forward into the future. This is why questions of legitimacy were so paramount. A wife's adultery was not just a personal betrayal, it was a threat to the entire lineage, a potential corruption of the bloodline. The family was a dynasty, and the marriage was its most important strategic decision. Today, we have mostly rejected this idea. We marry for love as individuals. We often move far away from our families of origin. We may even change our names or combine them. The idea of marrying someone to enhance our family name seems archaic and calculating. We prize our independence, and yet we haven't entirely escaped the medieval shadow. We still talk about marrying into a good family. We still feel the subtle or not so subtle pressures of parental approval. And we still think about the legacy we are creating, especially once we have children. What are the values, traditions, and stories that define our new family unit? What is the name we are making for ourselves? The medieval wisdom, when translated, is about seeing your marriage as the creation of a new legacy. You and your partner are the founders of a new house. This house is defined not by land or titles, but by your shared values, your reputation, your traditions, and the way you raise your children. Thinking in these terms can elevate a marriage beyond the day-to-day ups and downs. It gives it a sense of purpose and history. When you face a decision, you can ask not just, what is best for me, or what is best for us right now, but what is best for the future of our family? What kind of legacy are we building with this choice? This mindset encourages long-term thinking. It can inspire you to create unique family rituals, to write down your family story, to be more intentional about the values you pass on to your children. It transforms your marriage from a private arrangement for personal happiness into a small but significant contribution to the world. It's a project you are building together, something that will, you hope, outlast you both. Researchers in the field of family studies call this family identity, the sense of who we are as a family. Strong family identities are consistently linked to better outcomes for both parents and children. But can this focus on legacy become a burden, pressuring couples to stay together for the sake of the family name, even when they are deeply unhappy? How do you build a shared family identity when two partners come from vastly different backgrounds with conflicting values? And in a world that is so focused on the present moment, is it even healthy to be so concerned with the future legacy that you may never see? Does it distract from the simple present tense work of being kind to each other today? Number 19, do you need rituals? Life in the Middle Ages was governed by ritual. The day was structured by the ringing of monastery bells calling the faithful to prayer. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. The year was structured by the liturgical calendar, the preparations of Advent, the feasting of Christmas, the fasting of Lent, the celebration of Easter, the long stretch of ordinary time. These rituals were not optional lifestyle choices. They were the very framework of existence. They marked the passage of time, connected the community, and imbued daily life with a sense of sacred meaning. Marriage was no different. It was surrounded by rituals The public announcement of the banns in church for 3 successive Sundays, the wedding ceremony itself on the church porch, the priest's blessing of the marriage bed, the feasting and celebrations that followed. These were not just parties. They were public communal acts that transformed two individuals into a married couple in the eyes of God and the community. These shared rituals provided a sense of predictability and stability in a chaotic world. They were the rhythms that everyone understood and participated in. In our secular, individualistic world, we have lost many of these shared universal rituals. We can get married in a courthouse, on a beach, or in our backyard. We create our own traditions. While this offers great freedom, it can also lead to a sense of unmooring. Without these external structures, the health and stability of the marriage depend entirely on the internal resources of the two individuals, their feelings, their communication skills, their commitment. This is a lot of pressure. The medievals would have thought it was crazy to leave something so important up to the whims of individual emotion. They relied on the power of ritual to hold the marriage together when feelings failed. The lesson for us is to be intentional about creating and maintaining our own marital rituals. These don't have to be religious. They are simply the small, repeated behaviors that create a sense of shared identity and predictability. It could be the way you always have coffee together in the morning before looking at your phones. It could be a weekly state of the union meeting to discuss finances and schedules, a practice recommended by many modern marriage counselors. It could be an annual trip to the same place or a specific way you always celebrate birthdays. The social psychologist Barbara Fiese has done extensive research on family routines and rituals, finding that they are powerful predictors of marital satisfaction and children's well-being. Rituals create a private culture for the couple, a world with its own language and traditions that is separate from the outside world. They are the anchors in the storm. When you are angry or distant from your partner, the ritual can pull you back. You might not feel like having that Friday night pizza and movie, but you do it because it's the ritual, and the simple act of going through the motions can reopen the door to connection. But can rituals become rigid and lifeless, turning into empty obligations rather than sources of connection? What happens when one partner finds, a ritual deeply meaningful and the other finds it to be a chore? And in our fast-paced world, is the demand to maintain these rituals just one more source of pressure and a potential catalyst for a new kind of fight the fight about doing it right? Does the comfort of predictability inevitably lead to the death of spontaneity and passion? Number 18, what is the purpose of sex? For the medieval church, the answer was simple and unequivocal. The purpose of sex within marriage was procreation. That was its primary God-given function. The writings of theologians like St. Augustine of Hippo, who lived earlier but whose ideas profoundly shaped medieval thought, were clear on this. He saw sexual desire, or concupiscence, as a consequence of Adam and Eve's original sin. Therefore, sex for pleasure's sake alone was considered sinful, or at least a concession to fallen human weakness. The church laid out detailed rules about when couples could and could not have sex, not during Lent, not during Advent, not on Sundays or feast days, not when the wife was pregnant or nursing. This view seems incredibly repressive to us. We see a healthy and pleasurable sex life as a cornerstone of a happy marriage. We believe sex is a primary way to express love, intimacy, and connection, with or without the goal of having children. But is there anything to be learned from this starkly different perspective? The medievals, in their own way, took sex incredibly seriously. By tying it so closely to the profound act of creating new life, they imbued it with a significance that can sometimes be lost in our modern casual sex culture. For them, sex was a powerful force that created kinship, continued a lineage, and fulfilled a divine command. It was not a recreational activity. This focus on procreation also meant that sex was inherently linked to the future, to legacy, to the long-term project of building a family. It was, by definition, an act of hope and commitment. It wasn't just about the pleasure of two individuals in the present moment. It was about their shared investment in the generations to come. The modern psychotherapist Esther Perel, in her book Mating in Captivity, talks about how our modern emphasis on intimacy and communication can sometimes be at odds with erotic desire. And desire, she argues, often thrives on mystery, distance, and a bit of otherness. The medieval model, by separating sex from the constant need to express emotional intimacy, may have inadvertently preserved some of that otherness. Sex was a duty, a function, a sacred act It wasn't necessarily supposed to be a barometer of your feelings for each other on any given day. This could be liberating in its own way. It removes the pressure that many modern couples feel, the pressure to have a sex life that is constantly passionate and perfectly in sync with their emotional state. The medieval wisdom might be that sex has multiple purposes. Sometimes it is about profound intimacy. Sometimes it is about simple physical pleasure. And sometimes it is about participating in the larger story of creating and sustaining a family. By acknowledging these different facets, we can free ourselves from the tyranny of believing it must be a peak romantic experience every single time. Sometimes it is simply a part of the shared work of a life partnership. But if sex is decoupled from pleasure and intimacy, doesn't it become a mere mechanical chore, breeding resentment rather than connection? By elevating procreation above all else, did the medieval model cause immense suffering for couples who struggled with infertility? And in a world struggling with overpopulation, is a procreation-centric view of sex not only outdated, but also irresponsible? Can we ever truly separate the act of sex from the complex web of human emotion and desire? Number 17, should you expect hardship? The people of the Middle Ages lived with a daily expectation of hardship. Life was, as the 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes would later describe it, nasty, brutish, and short. The average life expectancy was around 30 to 35 years, skewed by incredibly high rates of infant and childhood mortality. A bad harvest meant a winter of hunger, or even starvation. A small cut could lead to a fatal infection. The epidemics like the Black Death, which swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, could wipe out a third of the population in a few years. War, famine, and disease were not abstract threats. They were the lived reality for the vast majority of people. When two people got married, they did so with the full understanding that they would face immense suffering together. The promise for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, was not a poetic flourish. It was a literal description of their likely future. There was no expectation of a comfortable, easy life. The goal was survival and, with God's grace, salvation after death. This is perhaps the most profound difference between the medieval and modern mindsets. We live in an age of unprecedented comfort, safety, and choice. Our culture tells us that we have a right to be happy. We see hardship not as an inevitable part of life, but as a problem to be solved or an injustice to be rectified. When it appears in our marriage in the form of illness, financial trouble, a difficult child, or just a long period of disconnection, we often feel that something has gone wrong. We think this isn't how it's supposed to be. We feel cheated, resentful, and we may even conclude that the marriage itself is a failure. The medieval wisdom is a harsh but powerful corrective to this modern expectation. By expecting hardship, you are not being pessimistic, you are being realistic. And this realism can be a source of incredible strength and resilience. When you view challenges not as a sign of failure, but as a normal part of a long-term partnership, you can face them with a different energy. It's not, why is this happening to us? But, okay, this is happening. How will we as a team get through it? This mindset fosters a kind of gritty, pragmatic loyalty. The value of a partner was not just how they made you feel on sunny days, but how they held up during the long, cold winter. Did they panic? Did they blame? Or did they put their shoulder to the wheel and do the work that needed to be done? The modern psychological concept of post-traumatic growth, researched by psychologists like Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, shows that people can experience positive psychological changes after struggling with adversity. Couples who navigate a serious crisis together often report that their relationship is stronger and more meaningful than before. The medievals knew this instinctively. They knew that shared suffering was a forge that could burn a partnership down to ash or temper it into something unbreakable. But does expecting hardship become a self-fulfilling prophecy, making us overly passive in the face of problems we could actually solve? Is there a danger of romanticizing suffering and staying in a genuinely destructive situation because we believe it's our cross to bear? And if happiness is no longer the goal, then what is? Is mere survival a worthy enough ambition for the most important relationship in our lives? Number 16 is your home, your castle. The phrase "an Englishman's home is his castle" is often traced back to this period. For a medieval lord, the castle was both his home and his fortress. It was the center of his power, the symbol of his authority, and his primary defense against a violent world. The walls were thick, the gate was heavy, and the moat was deep. The distinction between the private, domestic space and the public, military space was blurred. The hall was the center of life, a place where the family ate, servants worked, and business was conducted. But the castle was also a place of refuge. Inside its walls, the lord's family and followers could find a measure of safety from the chaos outside. This dual nature of the home section as both a fortress against the world and the center of family life was a powerful concept. It was a private kingdom that you and your family ruled. In our modern lives, our homes are rarely fortresses in a literal sense. But the metaphor still resonates. Our marriage and family life can feel like a sanctuary from the pressures of the outside world, the demands of work, the negativity of the news, the complexities of social life. The home is the place where we can, ideally, let down our guard and be ourselves. It is our shared private space. The medievals understood the importance of defending this space. For them, the threat was physical. For us, the threats are often more insidious. The constant connectivity of smartphones and the internet means the outside world is always trying to breach our walls. Work emails arrive at 10 p.m. The political arguments of social media are right there on the couch with us. The pressure to maintain a certain lifestyle, driven by advertising and comparison, seeps under the door. The wisdom here is to be as intentional about defending your home's emotional and psychological boundaries as a medieval lord was about defending his castle's physical ones. This means making conscious choices as a couple. Maybe you decide that there will be no screens at the dinner table. Maybe you create a no work talk after 8 p.m. rule. It means deciding together what and who you allow to cross your threshold. Not every friend, family member, or media influence has an automatic right to enter your shared sanctuary. You are the gatekeepers. Building this castle together is a powerful bonding experience. It involves defining your shared values and then creating a physical and emotional environment that reflects them. The psychologist William Doherty talks about this in his book, The Intentional Family. He encourages families to resist the encroaching forces of the consumer culture and to create their own family culture through deliberate choices and rituals. This is a modern echo of the medieval lord and lady deciding how to run their household, a private realm with its own rules, customs, and defenses. But can a home that is too much of a fortress become a prison? Does creating too strong a boundary between the home and the world lead to isolation and an inability to cope with external realities? And what happens when the threat isn't from the outside world, but from within the castle walls when one partner's behavior makes the home feel unsafe for the other? Can a fortress built for two become a battleground? Number 15, does honesty have a limit? Medieval society was not built on a foundation of radical, expressive honesty. It was built on a foundation of social harmony, hierarchy, and duty. People generally kept their innermost thoughts and feelings to themselves. The idea of telling your spouse every single thing you were thinking and feeling would have been seen as foolish and disruptive. Chaucer's The Franklin's Tale from the late 14th century offers a fascinating insight. A husband and wife, Arviragus and Dorigen, promise each other a marriage based on gentilis or nobility. He promises never to exert his mastery or mastery over her, and she promises to obey him in all things as a wife should. Their marriage is happy until, in his absence, she makes a rash, flirtatious promise to another man. The story explores the conflict between her personal feelings of dread and her public vow. The emphasis is on keeping one's word truth as the highest virtue, not on expressing one's inner turmoil. There was a strong sense that some things were better left unsaid for the sake of peace and stability. Discretion was a virtue. This is a challenging idea for us. We have been raised on the gospel of communication. We believe that a healthy relationship is one where both partners can share everything. We think honesty is always the best policy and that secrets are toxic. We are encouraged to express our needs, our fears, and our dissatisfactions. And there is a great deal of wisdom in this. Decades of research by people like John Gottman have shown that stonewalling and emotional withdrawal are deadly to a marriage. But has our pendulum swung too far? Have we created a tyranny of total transparency? The medieval wisdom suggests that there is a difference between honesty and unfiltered disclosure. You can be an honest person without blurting out every critical thought, fleeting doubt, or passing fantasy that crosses your mind. Sometimes, the most loving and loyal act is to keep your mouth shut. It's about choosing your battles. Is this complaint really important enough to disrupt our evening? Is this criticism truly constructive, or is it just me venting my own frustration? The medievals valued forbearance, the ability to suffer or endure patiently. In a marital context, this means having the wisdom to absorb a small annoyance without comment, the grace to overlook a minor flaw, and the self-control not to use your words as weapons, even if they are true. This isn't about deception or building a relationship on lies. It's about exercising prudence and kindness. It's about understanding that your partner's psyche is not a dumping ground for all of your emotional garbage. It is about prioritizing the long-term health of the relationship over the short-term satisfaction of being right or heard in every single moment. But how do we know the difference between wise discretion and toxic secret keeping? Where's the line between forbearing a small annoyance and enabling a serious problem? If we start to filter our thoughts, do we risk losing a part of ourselves in the marriage, slowly erasing our own authentic voice for the sake of a fragile peace? Can a relationship be truly intimate if it is not also radically honest? Number 14, are you indispensable? In the Middle Ages, people were part of a vast interconnected web of obligation. A peasant was tied to his lord, the lord to his king, and everyone to God. Society was a great chain of being, a hierarchy where every person and thing had a specific ordained place. Within the family, each person had a clear and indispensable role. The husband was the provider and protector. The wife was the manager of the household and bearer of children. The children were future laborers and the continuation of the family line. These roles were not chosen. They were assigned by birth and by God, and they were vital. If the husband died, his wife and children faced potential ruin unless she could quickly remarry. If the wife died, especially in childbirth, the husband was left with a household in chaos and motherless infants with a slim chance of survival. Each partner was a critical, load-bearing pillar of the family structure. The loss of one could cause the entire thing to collapse. This made them indispensable to each other, not just emotionally, but in the most practical life or death ways. We live in a very different reality. In many modern partnerships, both individuals are financially independent. Our social structures are more robust. The death of a spouse is a personal tragedy, but it is not usually a sentence of immediate destitution for the survivor. We value self-sufficiency. We are taught to be strong, independent individuals who choose to be in a relationship but don't need to be. This is a healthy development in many ways, as it reduces the potential for one partner to be trapped in a relationship out of economic necessity. But have we lost something in the process? Have we become so independent that we are no longer truly indispensable to each other? The medieval model, for all its rigidity, created a profound sense of mutual dependency. This dependency was the very source of commitment. You were bound to your partner because you literally could not manage the business of life without them. We can recreate a modern, healthier version of this. It's not about being financially or emotionally helpless. It's about intentionally creating areas of mutual indispensability. It's about building a shared life that is so deeply intertwined that the thought of untangling it is unimaginable. This could mean starting a business together, buying a home that requires both your incomes, or embarking on a long-term project like raising children or caring for aging parents. It's about consciously moving from a you and me mentality to a we that is greater than the sum of its parts. It's about letting your partner be the only one who knows how to fix the weird noise the dishwasher makes, or you being the only one who can navigate the complexities of your family's insurance plan. It's about creating a unique ecosystem where you each have roles that no one else can fill. This kind of interdependence chosen freely is what transforms a couple from two individuals cohabiting into a true partnership. But is this chosen indispensability just a golden cage? Does creating deep practical entanglement make it harder to leave a relationship that has become unhealthy? In our quest to be needed, do we risk losing the very independence that allows us to be in the relationship as equals? And what happens to the balance of a marriage when one partner, through illness or job loss, becomes far more dependent than the other? Can a relationship survive true, lopsided need? Number 13, should your marriage be public? In medieval Europe, a marriage wasn't a private affair. It was a public community event. The process began with the public announcement of the banns, read from the church pulpit on 3 consecutive Sundays. This gave anyone in the community a chance to object if they knew of a legal impediment to the marriage. The wedding ceremony itself often took place on the church porch in facie ecclesiae, in the face of the church, for all to see. It was followed by a public feast, and sometimes even a public bedding ceremony where the priest would bless the couple in their marriage bed. This all seems incredibly intrusive to us. But for the medievals, this public witness was what made the marriage real. There were no government marriage licenses or certificates. A marriage was valid because the community saw it, acknowledged it, and affirmed it. Your relationship was not just your own business, it was a building block of the community, and therefore the community had a stake in it. We have moved in the opposite direction. We see marriage as a deeply personal and private commitment between two people. The state requires a license, but beyond that, we feel our relationship is our own business. We curate the image of our marriage that we present to the world, primarily through social media. We post the smiling anniversary photos and the beautiful vacation shots. The public face of our marriage is often a carefully constructed performance of happiness. The struggles, the boredom, and the messy compromises happen behind closed doors. We have created a sharp divide between the public presentation and the private reality of our relationships. The medieval wisdom is that a marriage needs its community, not just for support, but for accountability and reality. When a marriage is public, in a healthy sense, it means it is integrated into a community of real, flesh and blood people who know you both. These are the people who saw you when you were dating, who celebrated at your wedding, and who see you on a regular basis. They know your story. This public dimension can be a powerful force for stability. Knowing that your friends and family are invested in your success can be a strong motivator to work through tough times. It also makes it harder to simply walk away. And a real community, unlike a social media audience, sees more than just the curated highlights. They see you when you're tired and grumpy. They know you're not perfect. This can be a relief. It frees you from the exhausting work of performing a perfect marriage. Your relationship doesn't have to be a flawless work of art. It just has to be a real, functioning part of a larger community. This is why many marriage advocates encourage couples to find a couple mentor or join a group with other couples. It is a way of recreating that public, communal aspect of marriage that the medievals took for granted. But what if your community's vision for your marriage doesn't align with your own? Can public accountability tip over into oppressive social pressure? In a polarized world, how can you find a community that will support your marriage without imposing a rigid set of ideological or religious expectations? Is the privacy we've gained in our modern marriages a precious freedom worth protecting at all costs? Number 12, is passion a good thing? The medieval idea of love was complicated. There was caritas, the charitable, Christian love for all people. There was the love of duty between a husband and wife, and then there was something else, the passionate, overwhelming, and often illicit love celebrated in the literature of courtly love. This was the stuff of knights and ladies, of secret glances, love potions, and heroic deeds done in a lady's name. The tales of Lancelot and Guinevere, or Tristan and Isolde, were the blockbusters of their day. But here's the crucial point: this kind of passionate, all-consuming love was almost always seen as existing outside of marriage. It was often adulterous, and it almost always ended in tragedy and death. Passion was viewed as a dangerous, destabilizing force. It was a form of madness, a sickness that could lead a good knight to betray his lord and a noble lady to dishonor her husband. A good, stable marriage was supposed to be based on more sensible things: property, family, and shared duty. Passion was a fire that could burn the whole social order down. We, of course, have a completely different view. We believe that passion is the very foundation of a romantic relationship. We fall in love, get married, and then spend the rest of our lives trying to keep the spark alive. When the passion fades, we worry that our love is dying. We see the absence of intense desire as a problem to be solved, a sign that the marriage is failing. Our entire model is built on the very thing the medievals saw as a deadly threat to stability. Is it possible we've become addicted to the initial intoxicating rush of romance? The medievals, in their caution, might be teaching us something important about the different phases of love. The intense can't eat, can't sleep passion of early love is a real biological phenomenon driven by hormones like dopamine and norepinephrine. But it is, by its very nature, temporary. No one can live in that state of heightened arousal forever. The medievals knew that a lifelong partnership had to be built on something more durable. What comes after passion? They would say affection, loyalty, shared history, and a deep, quiet companionship. The Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung wrote about this, suggesting that the second half of life requires a different approach to relationships, one less focused on projection and fiery passion, and more on acceptance and integration. The medieval wisdom is not that passion is bad, but that it is an unreliable foundation for a lifelong structure. It is the thrilling temporary scaffolding. The real building is made of stronger, quieter materials. By decentering passion as the sole indicator of a healthy marriage, we can learn to appreciate the value of these other, more enduring forms of connection. It allows us to see a period of low desire not as a crisis, but as a normal phase in a long journey, a time to rely on the other bonds we have forged. But if we accept the fading of passion as normal, do we risk settling for a bland, lifeless companionship? Is it possible to have both the wildfire of desire and the steady warmth of a hearth in the same relationship over many decades? And if courtly love was always tragic, was it because it was outside marriage, or was it because the literature was simply warning us that intense passion itself is inherently destructive, no matter the context? Number 11, do you have a shared purpose? For a medieval couple, their shared purpose was clear, simple, and non-negotiable. First get to heaven. Their entire lives were lived within a Christian framework where salvation of the soul was the ultimate goal. Marriage was a sacrament that, when lived according to God's law, was a path to that salvation. Second, survive on earth. This meant producing food, raising children to help with the work, and maintaining their small place in the social order. There was no need for a late-night conversation about what are we doing with our lives. The purpose was assigned to them by their faith and their circumstances. It was a purpose that was larger than their individual happiness. It was about fulfilling their duties to God, to their Lord, and to their family lineage. This gave their partnership a powerful, transcendent meaning. Their union was not just about them, it was a small part of a grand cosmic drama. In our secular age, we are largely on our own to figure out our purpose. We seek personal fulfillment, self-actualization, and happiness. When we get married, we often assume the purpose of the marriage is the happiness of the two individuals within it. The marriage is there to serve us, but what happens when it stops making us happy? If happiness is the sole purpose, then unhappiness becomes a legitimate reason to end it. The medievals would find this a terribly fragile basis for a lifelong commitment. Their model suggests that the most durable marriages are those that are for something beyond the couple's own emotional satisfaction. This something doesn't have to be religious. It can be any shared project or value that is larger than the two of you. It could be raising children who are kind and responsible citizens. It could be building a business that serves the community. It could be a shared commitment to environmental activism, to artistic creation, or to caring for an extended family. The Austrian neurologist and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust, wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that the primary human drive is not pleasure, but the pursuit of what we find meaningful. This applies as much to couples as it does to individuals. A marriage that is only about making each other happy is inward looking. A marriage that is about a shared purpose is outward looking. It provides a common direction, a north star to navigate by when you hit rough seas. It gives you a reason to stick together that transcends your feelings of the moment. It transforms the marriage from a vehicle for personal fulfillment into a partnership for making a small dent in the universe. But how can a couple find a shared purpose if they are passionate about very different things? Does having a grand shared purpose put too much pressure on the relationship, making it feel like a failure if you don't achieve your lofty goals? And is it possible that the simple, quiet purpose of providing a safe and loving space for each other in a difficult world is a large enough purpose in itself? Can mutual care be a transcendent value? Number 10, how do you fight? Conflict in medieval marriages could be brutal. The legal and social structure gave the husband the right to chastise his wife, which could and often did include physical violence. This was seen as a legitimate, if regrettable, tool for maintaining household order. However, there were limits. If a husband's violence was seen as excessive, the wife's family or the church courts might intervene. But for most disputes, resolution came not through communication, but through a restoration of the proper hierarchy. The wife was to submit, the husband was to rule benevolently. It was a system based on power, not on mutual understanding. But there was another side to it. Because communities were so close-knit, unresolved conflict was a public problem. A feud between a husband and wife could disrupt the peace of the entire village. This created a strong external pressure to resolve disputes, even if the resolution was simply a grudging return to the status quo. There was no room for long silent standoffs. Life was too interdependent for that. Our modern approach to marital conflict is thankfully very different. We reject violence and we champion communication. We are taught to use I statements, to practice active listening, and to seek win-win solutions. This is a vast improvement, yet we still struggle. Many couples get trapped in a cycle of what the Gottman Institute calls negative effect reciprocity, where each partner's anger, contempt, or defensiveness just triggers more of the same from the other, escalating the conflict until both are exhausted and nothing is resolved. Or we go to the other extreme and avoid conflict altogether, letting resentment simmer for years until they poison the relationship from within. The strange, hidden wisdom of the medieval model is its focus on resolution and restoration of function. They may have had the wrong method, hierarchy, and coercion, but their goal was a practical one. The conflict must end so that the family unit can get back to work. They couldn't afford the luxury of a prolonged emotional Cold War. This forces us to ask a hard question about our own fights. What is the goal? Is it to win the argument? Is it to prove you are right? Is it to make your partner understand the depth of your pain? Or is it to solve the problem and restore the peaceful functioning of your partnership? The research of marriage therapist Terry Real focuses on this. He argues that our individualistic culture encourages us to focus on our own truth in a fight, which often leads to a stalemate. He teaches couples to think relationally, to ask, what is best for us? This often means giving up on being right in order to be in a relationship. It's a pragmatic, function-focused approach that the medievals would have understood. The goal is not perfect justice or total emotional validation in every argument. The goal is to get the team back on its feet and moving forward. But if we prioritize function over feelings, do we risk creating a relationship where legitimate grievances are never truly heard or resolved? Can a marriage be functional on the surface while being emotionally dead underneath? And is the peace that comes from one partner always giving in for the sake of the team a true peace, or is it just a form of surrender? Number 9, what is the value of boredom? The medieval peasant's life was one of relentless cyclical toil. The seasons dictated the work: plowing in the spring, haymaking in the summer, harvesting in the fall, and surviving in the winter. The days were long and the tasks were repetitive. There was very little novelty. For a married couple, their life together would have followed this same predictable rhythm for years, even decades. There were no weekend getaways, no new restaurants to try, no exotic vacations. Life was, by our standards, incredibly boring. But this boredom was also a source of stability. The predictable routines of work and family life were the very substance of their partnership. The shared rhythm of their days and years was the container for their life together. Excitement and novelty were rare and often associated with danger, a traveling stranger, a war, a famine. The ordinary, the predictable, the boring, that was safety. That was home. We live in a culture that is terrified of boredom. We are constantly seeking new stimuli, new experiences, new adventures. We apply this same logic to our relationships. We believe a good marriage should be exciting. We worry when our relationship falls into a routine. We see predictability as the enemy of passion. We fear we are stuck in a rut. We are encouraged to spice things up. This constant pressure for novelty can be exhausting. It can make the normal, comfortable rhythms of a long-term partnership feel like a sign of failure. We mistake the peace of a stable companionship for the deadness of boredom. The medievals teach us to re-examine our relationship with the ordinary. They show us that there can be a deep beauty and connection in shared routine. The quiet comfort of knowing exactly how your partner takes their coffee, the familiar rhythm of your weeknight chores, the shared history embedded in your worn-out furniture. These are not signs of a boring relationship. They are the signs of a home. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger talked about the difference between the ready-to-hand and the present at hand. When a tool is working well, we don't even notice it. It's just an extension of our hand. We only notice it when it breaks. A stable, comfortable marriage can be like that. It is the ready-to-hand background of our lives, so reliable and functional that we sometimes stop noticing it. The medieval wisdom is to learn to appreciate this seamless functioning, not to mistake its quietness for emptiness. It's about finding the sacred in the ordinary, the romance in the reliable. It's about understanding that the most profound love is often not found in the grand, exciting moments, but in the thousands of small, boring, predictable acts of shared daily life. But is there a point where comfortable routine truly does become a stagnant rut, stifling individual growth and killing all desire. How do you distinguish between the healthy boredom of stability and the unhealthy boredom of disconnection? And in a long life, is it realistic to expect that the quiet comfort of predictability will be enough to sustain a partnership through decades of change? Number 8, who are your in-laws? For most of medieval history, when you married someone, you were not just getting a spouse. You were being absorbed into a new kinship network. A wife would typically leave her family and go to live with her husband's family, in their village or even in their household. She was now part of his clan. Her primary loyalty was expected to shift. Her in-laws were not just occasional visitors for the holidays, they were her new community, her co-workers, and her bosses. The relationship with the mother-in-law was particularly crucial as she was the one who would teach the new bride how to run the household. This system was designed to ensure social stability and the smooth transfer of property and labor. It was not designed for personal comfort. The potential for conflict was enormous, but the pressure to conform and get along was equally immense. Your relationship with your in-laws was, in many ways, as important as the relationship with your spouse. Today we have the opposite model. We expect to form a new, independent nuclear family unit that is separate from both families of origin. We expect our primary loyalty to be to our spouse, above and beyond our parents or siblings. We often see in-laws as a source of interference, a potential threat to the autonomy of our new family. We set boundaries, we complain about their meddling, we see a successful marriage as one that has successfully launched itself away from the gravitational pull of the extended family. The medieval model, while oppressive in its original form, points to a forgotten truth: a marriage is stronger when it is well integrated into a larger family system. When a couple isolates themselves from their extended families, they cut themselves off from a huge potential source of support. In-laws can provide childcare, financial help in a crisis, wisdom from a longer life experience, and a sense of history and belonging. Of course, they can also be critical and intrusive. The key is to find a middle ground between the medieval model of total absorption and the modern model of total separation. This means seeing your in-laws not as adversaries to be managed, but as potential allies to be cultivated. It means understanding that your partner will always be a son or daughter, a brother or sister, and that those relationships are a part of who they are. Instead of viewing your spouse's family as competition for their loyalty, you can view them as the team of people who created the person you love. This requires a shift in perspective. It requires diplomacy, patience, and a willingness to respect traditions and dynamics that are not your own. But the payoff can be a marriage that is not an isolated island, but a well-supported hub within a thriving multi-generational network. But what do you do when your in-laws are genuinely toxic or abusive? Is it ever right to demand that your spouse choose between you and their family of origin? And how do you navigate the conflicting demands and traditions of two different families without feeling like you are constantly betraying one side or the other? Can a marriage truly thrive if it is not the undisputed primary loyalty for both partners? Number 7, should you share everything? The concept of private property was central to the medieval world, and this extended to marriage. When a woman married, she brought with her a dowry, money, land, or goods from her family. This was technically her property, but it was administered by her husband. In return, she was entitled to a dower, a portion of her husband's property, often 1/3, that would support her if he died first. These were not romantic gestures. They were complex legal and financial arrangements, spelled out in detailed contracts. While in practice, the husband controlled the family's wealth, the law recognized that certain assets belonged to the wife's lineage and certain assets to the husband's. There was not a complete merging of property into one big shared pot. The finances were intertwined for the purpose of running the household, but they retained separate origins and, to some extent, separate destinies. The idea was to protect the property interests of the larger families involved in the marriage alliance. This stands in stark contrast to our modern romantic ideal of what's mine is yours, what's yours is mine. We tend to see the complete merging of finances as the ultimate sign of trust and commitment. Separate bank accounts can be viewed with suspicion, as if one partner is hedging their bets or hiding something. We believe in total financial transparency and unity. For many couples, this works beautifully. But for others, it can be a source of intense and chronic conflict. One partner might be a saver and the other a spender. One might have significant debt from before the marriage. One might earn significantly more than the other. forcing these different financial styles and situations into a single, shared account can feel like a constant battle for control. The medieval model offers a surprisingly modern alternative: yours, mine, and ours. This is a system that many financial planners now recommend for couples. Each partner maintains a separate personal account, and they also have a joint account for shared household expenses. A portion of each person's income goes into the joint account to pay the mortgage, bills, and groceries. The money that remains in their personal accounts is theirs to manage as they see fit to save, to invest, or to spend on their personal hobbies without needing to consult or justify it to their partner. This system respects both the shared commitment of the marriage, the ours account, and the individual autonomy of each partner, the yours and mine accounts. It can dramatically reduce fights about money because it carves out a domain of personal financial freedom. It is a pragmatic solution that, like the medieval dower and dowry system, acknowledges that two individuals are joining together, not dissolving into a single entity. But can a marriage have true unity if the finances are divided? Does maintaining separate accounts create a subtle but constant message of distrust or a built-in escape plan? And how do you fairly decide how much each person contributes to the ours account, especially if there is a large income disparity or if one partner leaves the workforce to care for children? Does this practical solution come at the cost of a deeper, more radical form of partnership? Number 6, do looks matter? In the Middle Ages, beauty was certainly appreciated. The courtly love poems are full of descriptions of the lady's fair skin, golden hair, and rosy cheeks. But when it came to choosing a marriage partner, beauty was far down the list of priorities for most people. What mattered was health, strength, and fertility. A peasant man needed a wife who was strong enough to endure a life of hard labor and childbirth. He needed a partner who looked sturdy. A noble family, in arranging a marriage, would be far more concerned with the bride's dowry and the political alliances her family brought than with the color of her eyes. People's appearances were also shaped by a life of hardship. Bad nutrition, poor dental hygiene, and diseases like smallpox meant that few people fit our modern standards of beauty. And with life being so short and precarious, a focus on the fleeting quality of physical appearance would have seemed incredibly frivolous. The value of a spouse was in their character, their skills, their family connections, and their ability to produce heirs and contribute to the household economy. Our culture is obsessed with physical appearance. We are bombarded with images of idealized beauty. We spend billions of dollars on cosmetics, fashion, and fitness, all in an effort to look more attractive. In the world of online dating, initial attraction is based almost entirely on a few carefully selected photos. We are taught that physical chemistry and sexual attraction are essential components of a successful romantic relationship. We fall in love with what we see, and we fear the inevitable effects of aging on ourselves and our partners. We worry that as our looks fade, so too will our partner's desire for us. The medieval perspective is a grounding and liberating one. It reminds us that physical beauty is a transient and ultimately superficial quality. A partnership built primarily on looks is built on shifting sands. The medievals, out of necessity, had to look deeper. They had to assess a potential partner's substance. Are they resilient? Are they kind? Are they a hard worker? Are they loyal? These are the qualities that sustain a relationship through sickness, poverty, and old age. This doesn't mean we shouldn't care about our appearance or feel attraction to our partner. But it does suggest we should be very honest with ourselves about how much weight we give to looks. It encourages us to actively cultivate our attraction to our partner's inner qualities and their sense of humor, their intelligence, their integrity. It also encourages us to focus on being the kind of partner whose value goes far beyond their physical appearance. The writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry wrote, "What is essential is invisible to the eye." The medievals would have agreed. They knew that the true beauty of a lifelong partner is revealed not in a youthful portrait, but in the steady gaze and capable hands of someone who has weathered decades of life by your side. But is it dishonest to pretend that physical attraction doesn't matter, or that its fading with age has no impact on a relationship? Can a marriage truly thrive in the complete absence of sexual desire, even if deep companionship remains? And in a world that so heavily rewards beauty, is it possible to truly unlearn our cultural biases and value a person's inner qualities above their external appearance? Is this a noble ideal or a biological fantasy? Number 5, Can you change your partner? The medieval world was one of fixed identities. You were born a peasant, a merchant, or a noble, and for the most part, that is what you remained for your entire life. Your role in society was determined by your birth, not by your personal ambitions or potential for growth. The same was true in marriage. A husband had his duties, a wife had hers. The goal was not to help your partner become the best version of themselves. The goal was for each of you to competently perform your pre-assigned role. You married a person for who they were and what they could do for the family unit at that moment. The idea of marrying someone's potential or hoping to change their fundamental character would have seemed absurd. You assessed the goods as they were and you made a deal. If a man was known to be a drunkard or a layabout, a wise father would not marry his daughter to him in the hopes that she could fix him. He would see it as a bad alliance, a poor investment for the family. We live in the age of personal growth and self-improvement. We believe that people can and should change. This is the promise of therapy, of self-help books, of our entire educational system. We often bring this mindset into our marriages. We fall in love with a person, but we also fall in love with their potential. We see their flaws not as fixed parts of their character, but as problems to be solved. We become our partner's coach, their cheerleader, their critic, their therapist. We encourage them to go back to school, to get a better job, to lose weight, to be more communicative, to be less anxious. We believe it is our job to help them and their job to change. This can be a beautiful expression of love and support. But it can also be a recipe for profound and endless frustration. The medieval wisdom is a dose of harsh realism. It is the simple, powerful idea that you cannot change another person. You can support them if they want to change. You can inspire them. You can set boundaries around their behavior, but you cannot fundamentally remake their personality, their habits, or their desires. The relentless effort to change a partner is often a hidden form of control and a deep sign of disrespect. It sends the constant message, the person you are right now is not good enough. This is corrosive to intimacy and trust. The medievals, in their pragmatic way, suggest a different path, radical acceptance. This doesn't mean you have to accept abusive or destructive behavior. It means accepting the fundamental core personality of the person you chose. It means letting go of the fantasy of who you wish they were and learning to live with and even love the real person in front of you. This is the foundation of the work of many modern therapists like Harriet Lerner, who writes in The Dance of Anger that our focus should always be on changing our own steps in the relational dance, not on forcing our partner to change theirs. But if we completely give up on the idea of changing our partner, do we become passive enablers of their worst habits? Where's the line between radical acceptance and simply giving up on the relationship's potential to be better? And if people truly can grow and change over a lifetime, is it not a form of love to encourage and even push them to do so? Is acceptance a virtue, or is it just a fancy word for resignation? Number 4, what do you owe the future? Medieval people lived with a powerful sense of being part of a continuum. They were one link in a long chain that stretched back to their ancestors and forward to their unborn descendants. Their lives were not their own. They were stewards of a legacy. The land they farmed was not theirs to sell. It belonged to the family, to the lineage. It was their duty to work it, preserve it, and pass it on, hopefully in slightly better condition, to the next generation. The family name and reputation were also a trust, something to be guarded and handed down. This long-term perspective shaped every major decision, especially marriage. A marriage was not a short-term arrangement for personal happiness. It was a multi-generational strategy. The primary question was not, does this person make me happy now? But will this union produce strong children and secure the family's future? This sense of duty to the future, to those not yet born, was a heavy burden, but it also gave life a profound sense of meaning and purpose. Our modern culture is intensely focused on the present. We are encouraged to live in the moment, to pursue immediate gratification, and to prioritize our current happiness. The future is often seen as an abstract concept. We make decisions, both large and small, based on what feels good right now. This short-termism can be incredibly damaging to a marriage. It can lead us to make impulsive financial decisions, to neglect the slow, unexciting work of building trust, and to give up on the relationship when it enters a difficult but temporary phase. If the primary goal is my happiness today, then any sacrifice for a long-term, uncertain future benefit can feel like a raw deal. The medieval mindset offers a powerful antidote. It asks us to see our marriage not just as a source of present-day fulfillment, but as a long-term project we are building for the future. It encourages us to become good ancestors. What are we creating as a couple that will outlast us? This could be literal, well-adjusted children, a financially secure estate. But it can also be intangible, a legacy of kindness, a reputation for integrity, a family culture of resilience. Adopting this long-term perspective changes the calculus of daily life. That tedious argument over the budget is no longer just a fight, it is part of the work of building a secure future. The sacrifice you make for your partner's career is not a loss, it is an investment in the long-term strength of your family unit. This mindset, which researchers on long-term thinking call cathedral thinking, is about starting a project whose full beauty you may never live to see. A marriage seen through this lens is a cathedral you are building together, stone by stone, day by day. But can an excessive focus on the future rob us of the joy of the present moment? Is it possible to become so focused on building a legacy that we forget to simply enjoy our lives and our partner today? And in a world that is changing so rapidly, is it even possible to plan for a distant future, or are we just deluding ourselves? Is the best way to serve the future simply to be as happy and healthy as we can be, right now? Number 3, where do you find your worth? In the hierarchical society of the Middle Ages, a person's worth was largely external. It was determined by their birth, their title, their land, and their reputation in the community. You were the son of a blacksmith, the wife of a lord, the daughter of a peasant. These were social facts that defined your value. Personal feelings of self-esteem were not a primary concern. Your worth was reflected in how well you performed your social role. A good wife was one who managed her household efficiently, was obedient to her husband, and produced healthy sons. A good husband was one who provided for his family, defended its honor, and managed his affairs with prudence. Your value was demonstrated through your actions and recognized by your community. It was a public and objective assessment. It was not based on your internal feelings of self-worth. We live in a therapeutic culture that tells us our worth is internal. We are taught that we should have high self-esteem, that we should love ourselves, and that our value does not depend on the approval of others. This is a powerful and important shift, liberating us from the rigid social judgments of the past. However, it can have an unintended side effect in marriage. We often come to our partners expecting them to be the primary source of validation for our internal sense of worth. We expect them to make us feel good about ourselves, to affirm our value, to be our number one fan. When they fail to do this, when they are critical or distracted or simply not paying enough attention, it can feel like a devastating blow to our very identity. We have made our fragile sense of self-worth dependent on the moment-to-moment behavior of another flawed human being. The medievals, in their own harsh way, understood the danger of this. Their system of external worth, while unjust, meant that a person's value was not solely in the hands of their spouse. A woman's worth was also tied to her role as a mother, her skills in weaving or brewing, and her reputation in the village. A man's worth was tied to his work, his status among other men, and his role in the community. Their value was diversified. The wisdom here is not to return to a rigid system of social roles, but to recognize the importance of having multiple sources of self-worth that are independent of your marriage. Your value should come from your work, your friendships, your contributions to your community, your skills, your hobbies, your spiritual practice. When you have a strong, diversified sense of your own worth, you put less pressure on your partner to be the sole provider of your self-esteem. You come to the relationship as a whole person, not as an empty vessel waiting to be filled with their approval. You can then love them for who they are, not for how they make you feel about yourself. This is what the psychologist David Schnarch calls differentiation, the ability to maintain your own sense of self while in a close relationship with another. But is it truly possible to be in a deeply intimate relationship and not have your sense of self-worth affected by your partner's opinion of you? If your spouse, the person who knows you best, does not value you, is it delusional to simply find your worth elsewhere? And could an overemphasis on independent self-worth lead to a marriage of two disconnected individuals who no longer truly need each other's affirmation or approval? Number 2 is love a feeling or a choice. For the medievals, this question would have been easy to answer. Love within marriage was a choice. It was an act of the will. It was not primarily an emotion. The feeling of romantic passion, as we've seen, was considered dangerous and separate from the institution of marriage. The love that a husband and wife owed each other was caritas, a form of Christian love that was about charity, loyalty, and unwavering commitment. It was a love demonstrated through action, providing for your family, caring for your spouse in sickness, and remaining faithful. You didn't have to feel loving every day, you had to act lovingly every day. The 13th century philosopher Thomas Aquinas defined love not as a feeling, but as to will the good of the other. It was a decision, a practice, a discipline. This was a love that could be commanded as in the biblical injunction to love your neighbor because it was a choice, not an uncontrollable emotion. Our modern culture has almost completely reversed this. We define love almost exclusively as a feeling. It is a feeling of intense affection, of attraction, of emotional connection. We fall in love as if it's something that happens to us, like catching a cold. We stay married as long as we are in love. When the feeling fades, we question the entire relationship. We say, I love you, but I'm not in love with you anymore, as if this is a profound and unanswerable truth that justifies ending a lifelong commitment. We have made our most important relationships hostage to the most fickle and unpredictable part of our nature, our emotions. The medieval wisdom is a powerful call to reclaim the idea of love as a verb. It is something you do, not just something you feel. It is the choice you make over and over again to will the good of your partner. This is an incredibly practical and empowering definition of love. It means that you have agency. You are not at the mercy of your fluctuating moods. On a day when you wake up feeling annoyed or distant or just plain tired of your partner, you are not out of love. You simply have an opportunity to practice love. You can practice it by making them a cup of coffee. You can practice it by listening to them talk about their day, even when you are not particularly interested. You can practice it by choosing not to say the cutting remark that is on the tip of your tongue. This is the love that builds a life. The writer C.S. Lewis, a medieval scholar himself, articulated this beautifully in his book Mere Christianity. He explains that the feeling of being in love is the explosion that starts the engine, but it is not the fuel that keeps it running. The engine runs on a steady, willed decision to love, to serve, and to be loyal. But can a marriage survive on choice alone without the feeling of love? Is a relationship based purely on willed action and duty not a cold and hollow thing? And if we consistently have to force ourselves to act lovingly against our own feelings, is that not a sign that we are in the wrong relationship? Is there a point where the choice to love becomes a form of self-betrayal? Number one, what if it's not about you? The medieval worldview was profoundly theocentric. God was at the center of everything. The individual was small, and their life had meaning only in relation to God's grand plan. A marriage was not, therefore, a private project for the personal fulfillment of two people. It was a sacred duty, a calling, a small part of a divine order. The purpose of your marriage was not to make you happy. The purpose of your marriage was to serve God, to serve your community, and to bring new souls into the world who would also serve God. Your personal happiness was a wonderful but ultimately secondary byproduct. The primary focus was external on God, on duty, on lineage. It was a worldview that constantly pulled you out of your own small circle of wants and feelings and directed your attention to something larger than yourself. This is the most radical and challenging piece of medieval wisdom for our modern minds. We live in the age of the self. Our primary project is our own happiness, our own growth, our own fulfillment. We enter marriage asking, what can this relationship do for me? How will it make me feel? How will it help me become the person I want to be? These are not bad questions. But when they are the only questions, they create a marriage that is fragile, self-centered, and constantly being evaluated against a benchmark of personal satisfaction. The slightest dip in my happiness becomes a crisis for the marriage. My partner's flaws become obstacles to my personal growth. The relationship becomes a consumer product that we can discard if it is no longer meeting our needs. The medieval perspective flips the entire script. It asks, what if your marriage is not about you? What if its primary purpose is not your own happiness? What if, instead, its purpose is to be a stable and loving environment for your children? What if its purpose is to be a source of strength and support that allows you both to better serve your community? What if its purpose is to be a small, quiet testament to the virtues of loyalty, sacrifice, and long-term commitment in a disposable world? This shift in perspective is revolutionary. It decenters the self. It transforms marriage from an exercise in mutual navel-gazing into a partnership with an outward-facing mission. It makes the inevitable moments of personal unhappiness less threatening. Those moments are no longer a sign that the entire project is failing. They are simply the difficult parts of a long and meaningful journey, a journey that is about something far more important than your own fleeting feelings. It is the ultimate realization that the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service to something larger. But in a secular world, without a shared belief in God, what is this something larger that a marriage can serve? If we sacrifice our personal happiness for a larger purpose, do we risk living a life of quiet desperation, only to find the purpose was an illusion? And is it truly possible for a human being to subordinate their own deep-seated need for happiness and fulfillment for decades on end? Is this the highest wisdom or the most dangerous lie?